So what happens when the virtues that, historically built civilization, like the drive to conquer, the instinct to protect, physical stoicism, what happens when all of that is suddenly diagnosed by society as like a public health crisis?
It's a wild question, yeah.
Right. But before we actually answer that, I need you, the listener, to do me a really quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the show right now.
Yeah, please do.
It is genuinely the single best way to ensure we can keep bringing you these ultra long, incisive, and just truly unfiltered deep dives into the world's most provocative ideas. Because today's deep dive is exactly that.
Oh, absolutely. It's intense.
We are opening up a text that basically acts as an operations manual for the modern man. It's this highly controversial, super fascinating new ebook called Hierarchy of Competence: How Merit, Logic, and Duty Will Inherit the Earth. And that's by Conrad Reicher.
Conrad Reicher, yeah.
And hey, if you want to follow along with us or just, dive into the full unvarnished experience yourself, you absolutely should check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to buy a copy of the book. And make sure you go follow the author's ongoing work on Substack at Conrad Reicher.
Yeah, it is an essential read, honestly, if you want to really understand the current cultural fracture we're in. Because Reicher has written a text that's engineered specifically for men's rights activists and what is, colloquially known as the red-pilled manosphere.
Right, which is already a lightning rod of a topic.
Oh, exactly. But what makes this book so unique is the scope of it. I mean, he isn't just complaining about modern dating apps or whatever.
Yeah.
He is attempting this massive archaeological dig into the history of our Western institutions, trying to map out exactly how and when they were captured by what he identifies as feminist and Marxist ideologies.
Right, and because of the intensely charged nature of this text, we really need to set our mission parameters for this deep dive immediately. We are going to be exploring some highly politically sensitive content today. Critiques of feminism, the administrative state, the legal system, all of it. So I want to make it unequivocally clear to you, the listener. Right now, neither of us here is taking a political side.
Nope, not at all.
We are acting purely as your impartial guides. We are not endorsing Reicher's viewpoints, and we're not condemning them either.
Right. Our job today is just to take a magnifying glass to the exact architecture of his argument, impartially report the ideas in the original source material, and just see how his logic operates.
Exactly. We're just here to understand the blueprint he's drawn up.
And that blueprint, it actually begins with a diagnosis of exhaustion.
Exhaustion, like physical exhaustion.
No, more like psychological exhaustion.
Yeah.
The foundational premise of hierarchy of competence is that modern men are just completely exhausted. Not from physical labor, but from psychological taxation.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, Reicher argues that the male mind and the institutions that men historically relied on have been systematically hijacked by what he calls a gynocentric matrix.
A gynocentric matrix. That sounds like something straight out of a dystopian sci-fi novel.
It really does.
So what are the actual mechanics of this matrix? Like, how does a societal operating system even become gynocentric?
Well, he defines it as this entire cultural framework that revolves around female imperatives, emotionalism, and this highly bureaucratic administrative state.
Okay.
In this framework, natural masculine energy, like the agentic drive to build things, to impose order on chaos, physical protection, it's no longer viewed as a civilizational engine.
Right, it's not celebrated anymore.
Exactly. Instead, it is viewed as a systemic threat. And because it's a threat, the matrix is literally designed to manage it, medicate it, or just tax it into submission.
Wow, so it's very adversarial.
Highly. And Reicher insists this book is not self-help, by the way. He is fiercely dismissive of modern self-help.
Oh, really? Why?
He views it as mostly therapeutic navel-gazing. He frames this book strictly as a tactical guide for red-pilled men to reclaim their sovereignty.
But his first tactical step completely caught me off guard when I read it. Because he doesn't start with, go lift weights or move to an off-grid cabin in the woods.
Right, yeah.
He starts with a grammar lesson.
Yeah.
He brings up the classical trivium.
Yeah, which is a brilliantly subversive way to structure a survival guide, if you think about it.
It is.
Because for thousands of years, the Western educational model was built on the trivium, which is these three sequential stages of learning grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that mean in this context?
So grammar isn't just about, where to place a comma or spelling. It is the science of defining reality. It's establishing the objective meaning of words.
Right.
Then logic is the mechanics of how you connect those defined words to form valid arguments. And rhetoric is how you use those logical arguments to actually persuade others and build consensus.
So it's a progression.
Exactly. And Riker argues that the subjugation of modern men didn't start with new laws being passed. It began with the deliberate corruption of grammar.
He has this quote early on. It goes, whoever controls the definitions controls the argument. Whoever controls the argument controls the culture.
Which is chillingly accurate.
Yeah, and he illustrates this through what he calls a lexical audit. He basically traces the semantic drift of words we use all the time, and the most glaring example he gives is the word equality.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge one for him. Because historically, right, in the Western Judeo-Christian tradition, equality meant equality before the law, or just the recognition of equal human dignity.
Meaning everyone plays by the same rules.
Right. Regardless of your birth, the rules of the game apply to you exactly the same way. But Riker argues that the architects of this matrix have deliberately drifted the definition of equality to mean equity.
And the mechanism of that shift is devastating, honestly, because equity requires a completely different relationship with the state.
Entirely different. Riker defines equity as the Marxist statistical equivalence of outcomes across arbitrarily defined identity groups.
Wow.
And the crucial mechanism here is that equity has to be enforced by state power.
Because it doesn't happen naturally.
Exactly. If you believe in equality of opportunity, you just accept that free individuals will make different choices and end up with different results.
Yeah. Some people work harder, some people get lucky.
Right. But if you demand equity, equal outcomes, and the natural world obviously doesn't produce them, the only way to achieve it is for a massive bureaucratic authority to step in, penalize the competent, and redistribute their wealth and status to the less competent.
So by just swapping the definition of equality for equity in the culture, the state essentially gains this massive mandate to execute wealth redistribution without ever having to openly justify the theft.
Yes.
It's like a linguistic Trojan horse. You think you're agreeing to fairness, but you're actually agreeing to systemic leveling.
Precisely. And he applies this lexical audit to the corporate world, too, specifically targeting the term emotional labor.
Oh yeah, this was a fascinating historical correction.
It really was.
Because Riker points out that the sociologist Arlie Hochschild actually originally coined emotional labor back in 1983, and it was to describe paid workplace masking.
Right, like the flight attendant example.
Exactly. The classic example is a flight attendant. A passenger is literally screaming in their face, but they are being paid by an airline to physically suppress their natural reaction and just smile. It was a transactional commercial exertion.
But Riker argues that modern feminist institutions completely severed the word from those commercial roots.
Oh.
Well, he uses strict philosophical definitions to explain how it was corrupted. Labor, in an objective sense, is the exertion of physical or intellectual energy to change the external physical world.
Right, like moving a rock or writing a piece of code, building a house.
Yes. Subjective emotional states, however, are internal and immaterial. So Riker argues that calling the management of your own internal feelings labor is an ontological category error.
An ontological category error, that's heavy.
It means you are fundamentally confusing a state of being with an act of doing. He claims this term was hijacked to basically pathologize male stoicism and to commodify female emotionalism.
Oh, wow.
It essentially demands that society treat the internal experience of managing a relationship as if it were equivalent to the literal, back-breaking civilizational toil that men perform in the physical world.
Okay, let me challenge this, though, because I can hear listeners wondering about the utility of some of this modern language.
Sure.
Like, when we talk about concepts like a microaggression or honoring someone's lived experience, couldn't you argue that we are simply developing a more granular vocabulary for empathy? Like, we're just finding words for subtle social frictions that used to just be ignored?
Right, and Riker deeply objects to that framing.
He does.
Oh yeah, he dissects terms like microaggression and lived experience, and he classifies them as semantically empty vessels.
Empty vessels.
Yeah. He says they aren't tools for empathy at all. They are tools for epistemological warfare.
What does that mean, practically?
Their exact function is to bypass the logical faculty. Think about the mechanics of a microaggression, right? By attaching the word aggression, which legally and morally implies intent and objective harm, to a micro or perceived slight, you take what used to be just a subjective disagreement and you instantly escalate it into a fabricated psychological injury.
Oh, I see. It reframes the person who felt offended as the victim of a literal attack.
Exactly. And lived experience operates the exact same way.
How so?
Well, Riker points out that in traditional logic, An experience is just an anecdote.
Right, it's just a story.
Yeah, it's a data point that has to be tested against objective reality. But lived experience is deployed as this unfalsifiable trump card.
Ah,
If a man presents statistical data and a woman counters with her lived experience, the matrix demands that her subjective emotion overrule his objective data.
I guess you can't argue with your experience.
Right. Riker argues these terms replace a meritocracy of facts with a subjective hierarchy of victimhood.
And if you accept those terms, if you actually use that grammar, you have surrendered the argument before it even begins.
You've already lost.
You are forced to operate within a logic system that inherently discounts your reality. Which brings us to perhaps the most weaponized term. He audits toxic masculinity.
Oh, man. This is where Riker's analysis hits its absolute peak regarding grammar.
Yeah, walk us through it.
Etymologically, masculinity is just the set of attributes, behaviors, and roles associated with boys and men. Historically, it's tied to natural virtues like fortitude, risk-taking, protection, and generative power.
The things that build a society.
Exactly. But the Matrix attaches the word toxic, which is a clinical, chemical term for literal poison.
Right, so it's not just saying, some men behave badly sometimes. It's actually tying the biological reality of manhood to a hazard label.
Exactly. By forcing men to internalize this phrase, Riker argues, the culture successfully framed the natural biological telos, the inherent purpose and drive of men, as a public health crisis.
That's insane when you put it like that.
It is. The very virtues that men use to build cities, fight wars, and protect borders are reframed as a disease that requires therapeutic intervention.
Right.
If a boy is energetic and competitive in school, he isn't a future leader. He's displaying toxic traits that literally need to be medicated out of him.
Okay, so grammar is the first pillar, but what about the rest of the trivium? If they have corrupted the definitions, how does that corrupt the logic?
So Riker argues that once the definitions are detached from objective reality, logic, the second stage, just collapses into logical fallacies, primarily the appeal to emotion. He insists that men must rigidly reclaim the law of non-contradiction.
Which is the rule that two opposing things can't be true at the same time.
Exactly, not in the same way. If the culture says gender is a completely fluid social construct, but simultaneously demands strict quotas to ensure biological women are represented on corporate boards, that is a logical contradiction.
You can't have it both ways.
Right. And Riker advises men that they must simply refuse to engage with arguments built on contradictory premises.
Which flows directly into rhetoric, the third pillar.
Yes. Rhetoric is how you communicate. And Riker's rule for modern rhetoric is refusal.
Refusal?
Complete refusal. Do not adopt the enemy's vocabulary. If you are dragged into an HR dispute or a cultural debate, and you begin using their corrupted terms, if you apologize for your privilege or try to validate a microaggression, you lose.
Because you've entered their matrix.
Exactly. You must communicate using strictly objective, classical definitions. You have to force the matrix to engage with your reality rather than capitulating to its fantasy.
But, knowing the grammar and mastering the rhetoric is only theoretical. And Riker is very clear that this corrupted code has actually manifested in the physical world.
Oh, it's built massive institutions.
Yeah. And he directs his absolute harshest criticism at the legal system and the modern family structure. He describes contemporary society as a gynocentric nursery.
The metaphor of the nursery is vital here. Because what is a nursery, really?
It's a room for babies.
Right? It is an environment designed specifically for the safety and pacification of infants. It is padded, it is brightly colored, and it is entirely devoid of risk.
Wow, okay.
Riker argues that society has been socio-engineered to mimic this. It rewards the passive, compliant, and agreeable nice guy while structurally and violently punishing agentic traditional masculinity.
And he locates the absolute apex of this systemic punishment in the family court system, right?
Yes.
He gives it this incredibly ominous title, the ex parte crucible.
And to understand the mechanics of this crucible, Riker points directly to the 1981 Duluth model of domestic violence intervention.
Yeah, he doesn't just mention it in passing. He uses it as the exact moment the state institutionalized male guilt on a statutory level.
Right.
I really want to dig into how the Duluth model works functionally, because it sounds like Riker views it not as a justice system, but almost like a sociological algorithm. Like you input a conflict, and the algorithm automatically outputs a predetermined villain.
That is precisely how he views it. The framework of the Duluth model explicitly assumes that domestic violence is fundamentally a mechanism of patriarchal power and control exercised by men against women.
Period.
Yes. It takes a macro sociological theory, basically Marxist class struggle,
Yeah.
but applied to gender, and forces it onto micro incidents of domestic friction.
So it completely bypasses the actual facts of the specific case.
It bypasses constitutional due process entirely. Riker details the chilling legal consequences of this framework. The Duluth model essentially contains no conceptual category for a male victim or a female primary aggressor.
That's terrifying.
He argues that it renders male suffering completely invisible to the state apparatus.
Wow.
If a man is being physically attacked by his partner, and he calls the police, the officers arriving on the scene are often trained under Duluth principles. They are taught to look for the oppressor.
And because he's a man.
Because the man is larger, and because he fits the demographic profile assigned by the model, Riker points out that the man is frequently the one who leaves in handcuffs, regardless of who actually initiated the violence.
The system literally equates healthy male agency with inherent violence.
Exactly.
To illustrate the human cost of this algorithm, Riker spends a huge portion of the book detailing the story of a man he calls David. And this isn't just a brief anecdote, it's a terrifying autopsy of a man's life.
It is brutal to read.
David is presented as the archetype of the traditional social contract. He's a hardworking, blue-collar guy. He built a successful contracting business, provided completely for his family, never committed a crime, never had a substance abuse issue.
He did everything right.
Right, he did everything the culture told him a good man is supposed to do.
And then David enters the ex parte crucible. His marriage dissolves, and suddenly all of that competence and provision means absolutely nothing.
It's actually weaponized against him. Riker walks through the exact legal mechanisms used to dismantle David. It starts with an ex parte order, which is a temporary restraining order granted by a judge based entirely on the uncorroborated emotional testimony of the ex-wife.
Without David even being in the room to defend himself.
Exactly. Instantly, he is removed from his own home and separated from his children.
And then the financial extraction begins.
Right.
Riker details the discovery process, where the court meticulously catalogs every single asset David has ever built. But when it comes to child support and alimony, they don't base it on the family's actual needs.
Now, what do they base it on?
According to Riker, they base it on imputed income, which is what the state decides David could be making if he worked at absolute maximum capacity.
Oh my God.
So David is suddenly chained to this massive monthly payment to a woman who has actively alienated him from his children. And if he fails to pay, he faces debtor's prison.
It really sounds like the modern family court isn't a justice system balancing the scales at all. It operates more like a rigged casino.
A big casino, yeah.
And in this casino, the House, which is the state bureaucracy, the lawyers, the judges, the whole administrative apparatus, always wins by taking a permanent cut of the male provider's labor, regardless of what happens to the children or the family structure.
That is the exact mechanism Riker is exposing. He views the administrative state as a parasite that feeds on male competence.
A parasite.
Yeah. The state uses the dissolution of the family as a pretext to subsidize female rebellion while keeping the bureaucracy funded. The man is simply the ATM funding the entire operation.
So if a red-pilled man finds himself trapped in this ex parte crucible, what is Riker's tactical advice? Because he clearly doesn't think you can win by appealing to a judge's sense of fairness.
No, not at all. He demands cold, rational, almost terrifying stoicism. He treats the legal system like a besieged fortress.
Okay.
He advises men to completely stop acting like broken-hearted litigants begging for mercy or trying to explain their side.
Right.
The court does not care about your feelings, and any display of male anger or frustration will instantly be categorized as a threat and used against you.
So how do you fight an algorithm?
With undeniable data.
Yeah.
Riker advises men to wear hidden body cams during every single custody exchange so that the mercenaries of the state cannot manufacture a crime or a violation of a protective order.
Wow. Body cams.
Yes. He demands that men force all communication with their ex-partners into a verifiable paper trail texts, emails, court-approved parenting apps. You do not argue. You do not express anger.
You just document.
You do not try to co-parent with someone who is actively trying to destroy you. You smother the court's emotional, narrative-driven machinery with a mountain of raw, time-stamped data. You withdraw your emotional labor completely.
Because the Matrix, as he puts it, feeds on that emotional reactivity. It wants the man to explode so it can justify its own existence.
Exactly.
But surviving this legal and administrative hellscape, it does something profound to a man's psychology. Riker writes that the men who endure and survive this crucible undergo an ego death.
It is a profound, violent psychological shattering. Riker talks about the naive, blue-pilled ego, the part of the man that still believed the state was fundamentally fair, that his hard work would eventually be rewarded, that the traditional social contract was still intact.
All the stuff we're taught growing up.
Right. That ego has to die. It is a brutal collision with objective reality. But Riker argues that this death is absolutely necessary. To survive, a man has to fundamentally sever his psychological connection to the comfortable lies of modernity.
But rebuilding the physical and legal boundaries only highlights the vulnerability of the mind, right? I mean, if a man successfully navigates the legal crucible, but his neurochemistry is still tethered to a digital slot machine, his newfound freedom is basically useless.
Totally useless.
So how does Riker suggest severing that mental tether? Because Section 3 of the book shifts from legal theory to this intensely physical, biological protocol. And he points the finger directly at big tech.
He does. He argues that the architects of our digital world, the Silicon Valley executives, are not just software developers, they are behavioral psychologists utilizing what he calls demonic architecture.
Demonic architecture.
Yes. And to understand how it works, Riker brings up B.F. Skinner and the variable ratio schedule of reinforcement.
Which is exactly why you, the listener, have probably felt the urge to check your phone 3 times since we started this deep dive.
Guilty.
You're waiting for that unpredictable payout. Explain how Skinner's mechanics are weaponized against men.
So, in the mid-20th century, B.F. Skinner discovered that if you put a rat in a box with a lever, and the lever dispenses a food pellet every single time it's pressed, the rat will just eat until it's full and then ignore the lever.
Right, predictable reward.
But if the lever dispenses a pellet on a variable ratio, meaning sometimes it gives food, sometimes it gives nothing, sometimes it gives a massive jackpot, the rat will become obsessed.
It drives them crazy.
It will press the lever frantically, ignoring sleep, ignoring mating, ignoring actual survival, just chasing the unpredictable dopamine hit.
Wow.
Riker argues that this exact psychological mechanism is engineered into every social media feed, every notification badge, every single swipe on a dating app.
It delivers these digital dopamine pellets that just keep the male mind pacing frantically in a digital Skinner box.
Exactly. And the consequence of this is a state of learned helplessness.
How does that manifest?
Well, by subjecting men to a daily fire hose of global outrages, cultural decay, and algorithmic anger via doom scrolling, which are problems they cannot individually or physically solve, the tech companies literally short-circuit the innate male instinct to fight back or build.
Because you're expending all that energy just being mad at a screen.
Right. You sit on the couch, you scroll, your heart rate elevates, you seethe with rage, and you do absolutely nothing in the physical world. You become a spectator in your own life.
And Riker's solution to this is extreme. I mean, it's not a gentle suggestion to turn off your phone for an hour before bed. He prescribes severe asceticism.
Yeah, a complete screen detox.
And he introduces this fascinating philosophical critique of the internet, calling it a flatland. What are the mechanics of this flatland?
In the physical objective world, Riker argues, hierarchy is real and it is based on competence.
Right.
The bridge holds the weight of the train or it collapses. The strongest man lifts the heaviest weight. The most skilled carpenter builds the sturdiest house. Reality provides immediate, uncompromising feedback.
You can't fake it.
Exactly. But the internet is an egalitarian flatland. It enforces a radical leftist egalitarianism.
How so?
On the internet, an unemployed, chronically online troll operating anonymously from a basement is granted the exact same screen space, the exact same font size, and the exact same algorithmic visibility as a master craftsman, a philosopher, or a decorated veteran.
Wow. It destroys natural hierarchy and completely replaces it with the cheap dopamine of visual validation, likes, retweets, views.
Yes.
It trains men to value crowd consensus over objective truth.
Which is fatal to masculine agency. So how does a man break out of the flatland? Riker mandates interventions that target the physical body. He requires fasting, and not as a weight loss diet, but as a severe biological intervention.
Let's look at the mechanism of that. Why does starving the body actually fix the mind?
He roots this in both ancient monastic tradition, like the Desert Fathers who retreated to the wilderness, and modern empirical science. He extensively cites the peer-reviewed literature on autophagy and neurogenesis.
Autophagy, okay.
Yeah. When you deliberately deny the body calories for an extended period, you induce a state of metabolic stress. The body realizes it isn't getting external fuel, so it turns inward. Autophagy is the process where cells literally begin to eat their own damaged and senescent components to survive.
So by starving the body, you are functionally forcing your cells to clean house. You're clearing the physical brain fog caused by constant digital and caloric overload.
Yes. Fasting, the deliberate denial of appetite, systematically severs the biochemical chains of the digital matrix. It forces a reset of the dopamine pathways. You stop being a slave to your immediate impulses.
And he pairs this metabolic stress with what he calls the biological reset, which means intense physical exercise.
But he is very specific. He doesn't mean jogging on a treadmill while watching cable news. He means moving heavy iron.
He writes this incredibly vivid, visceral description of the deadlift. That section stuck with me more than almost anything else in the book.
It's poetry, really.
It is. He describes the ritual of it. Chalking the hands, gripping the cold knurling of the iron barbell, dropping the hips, engaging the core, and pulling. And he talks about that specific moment, the momentary blackout, the shifting of blood pressure from the sheer, raw physical exertion, where the only thing that exists in the entire universe is you and the immovable object.
Right.
Moving that immovable object off the floor and locking it out at the top, he elevates this to a profound philosophical act.
Because it is the reclamation of physical territory.
Yes.
Modernity, Riker argues, forces men into a sedentary, screen-addicted lifestyle, bathed in artificial light and microplastics, which produces what he categorizes as estrogenic inflammation.
Estrogenic inflammation.
Yeah, he says it chemically castrates men through a surplus of comfort and passivity. The deadlift is the ultimate rebellion against gravity, against entropy, and against the matrix.
Wow.
It proves to the man's own central nervous system that he possesses agency in the physical world. He is realigning his biological, hormonal profile away from anxiety and compliance and toward confidence, high testosterone, and resilience.
So you're starving the body of digital garbage, you're inducing autophagy, you're lifting heavy iron, you are rebuilding the physical vessel.
Right.
But physical strength without a fortified mind just makes you a stronger slave. Riker says you have to rebuild the cognitive fortress. And his methods for this in Section 4 are completely countercultural to the modern hustle culture grind set.
Totally opposite.
He starts his epistemology with rest. He mandates the strategic nap.
Which sounds paradoxical to a lot of type A men.
Right. A manifesto for masculine dominance telling you to take a nap in the middle of the day.
But again, you have to look at the biology. Riker cites endocrinology studies showing that cutting a man's sleep degrades his circulating testosterone by 10 to 15%, which mimics a decade of natural aging.
That's insane.
The corporate matrix profits immensely from your chronic exhaustion. An exhausted man is compliant. He buys convenience food. He pays for mindless entertainment. He doesn't have the energy to build his own empire. The strategic nap is a deliberate refusal to be ground down by the corporate machine.
And he pairs this physical rest with a mental trial, the contemplative walk. But he attaches incredibly strict rules to this.
Very strict.
Absolutely no devices, no podcasts, no music, no companions, no fitness trackers. Just you, the physical environment, and your thoughts.
Which Riker openly admits is going to be agonizing for the modern man at first.
Oh, for sure.
Because it acts as a severe physiological dopamine fast. When you remove the constant stream of digital input, you will experience acute withdrawal. You will feel phantom vibrations in your pocket. You will experience spikes of anxiety.
Right, because you're detoxing.
But Riker says that discomfort, that low-level panic, is the literal sensation of the matrix losing its grip on your neurochemistry. It forces you to confront objective reality without a digital buffer.
And this brings us to a really powerful historical connection he makes about surviving psychological warfare. He references Admiral James Stockdale.
Yes.
Now, Stockdale was the highest-ranking naval officer held as a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. He endured 7 years of unimaginable, systematic physical and psychological torture.
Brutal.
But Riker points out that Stockdale didn't survive that crucible through modern therapy, or by processing his feelings, or by just hoping for an early release. He survived through the strict application of the stoic philosophy of Epictetus.
Stockdale accepted objective reality.
Exactly.
The core tenet of Epictetus that Stockdale relied on is understanding what is within your control and what is not. Stockdale didn't demand that the universe be fair. He didn't demand that his captors recognize his humanity. He dealt with the universe exactly as it presented itself.
And Riker applies this directly to the modern man navigating the culture war.
Yes. To survive the ideological possession of the Matrix, you must anchor your mind in objective truth, the logos, rather than subjective emotion or the desire for fairness.
Which leads right into his blistering critique of the patriarchy. He dismantles this entire sociological concept using the scientific principle of falsifiability, which was originally proposed by the philosopher Karl Popper. Let's explain how Popper's mechanism works.
Karl Popper argued that for a theory to be considered scientific, it must be falsifiable, meaning there must be some observable evidence or condition that could prove the theory wrong.
Right.
If a theory explains every possible outcome, it actually explains nothing. It is a closed loop of religious dogma. Riker applies this exact test to the patriarchy and concludes it is an unfalsifiable conspiracy theory.
So how does that loop function in practice?
Riker maps it out perfectly.
Right.
If women earn less money than men on average, the Matrix claims it is due to the patriarchy suppressing them.
Okay.
If women earn more money than men or graduate college at significantly higher rates, the Matrix claims women are triumphantly overcoming the patriarchy. If men succeed, it is because of invisible systemic privilege. But if men fail, if they die in workplace accidents at vastly higher rates, if they make up the majority of the homeless population, or if they commit suicide at 4 times the rate of women, the Matrix claims that it's just the pressures of patriarchy backfiring on men.
Wow. The patriarchy is positioned as the invisible cause of literally everything bad and the obstacle to everything good.
Exactly. It is a cognitive trap explicitly designed to demonize male agency while absolving women of any systemic responsibility.
Hold on, let me challenge this from the perspective of a listener who is looking at historical timelines.
Sure.
If someone hears this and says, but wait, look at history, look at voting rights, property laws, workplace representation, aren't institutions historically biased against women? Hasn't society objectively oppressed them? How does Riker account for that historical record without just waving it away?
Well, he doesn't wave it away.
Yeah.
He recontextualizes how that historical narrative was deliberately constructed and weaponized in the modern era. And to do that, he introduces the history of Antonio Gramsci and the concept of cultural hegemony.
Right.
Gramsci was an Italian Marxist theorist writing from a fascist prison in the 1920s and 30s. Gramsci realized that the traditional Marxist revolution, the violent uprising of the working class against the capitalists, was completely failing in the West because the working class actually liked their culture and their religion.
So they needed a new mechanism of revolution.
Exactly. Gramsci argued that the left could not win on pure economic arguments. To achieve revolution, they needed to execute a long march through the institutions.
Oh, long march.
Yes, they needed to slowly infiltrate the culture-generating organs of society, the universities, the media, the entertainment industry, the church, and eventually corporate HR departments.
Yeah.
Riker argues their explicit goal was to flip the Western epistemic framework. They needed to shift the culture from logos, objective reality, logic, and merit to pathos, subjective emotion, victimhood, and grievance.
So replace facts with feelings as the ultimate arbiter of truth.
Right?
But that still doesn't explain how they got men to go along with it. I mean, why would men willingly dismantle the institutions that supposedly benefit them?
That is where Riker introduces a concept from evolutionary psychology called the women are wonderful effect.
What is that?
This is a highly documented cross-cultural cognitive bias where both sexes automatically associate women with positive, gentle, and innocent traits much more readily than they do men. Riker argues this is biological firmware. For millennia, in harsh physical environments, the men who instinctively protected women and children were the ones who successfully passed on their genes.
Oh, I see. So men are biologically primed to leap into action and protect women at the very first sign of distress, even without analyzing the facts.
Yes, and Riker argues the absolute genius of the gynocentric matrix is that it weaponizes this innate male protective instinct against men themselves. When a feminist organization or a media outlet claims that women are under systemic assault from invisible patriarchal forces, the male hindbrain bypasses logic entirely. It just screams, protect.
Right.
And so, men willingly open their wallets, they step down from leadership roles, and they vote to rewrite the laws that eventually disenfranchise them. The Matrix uses male virtue to extract male resources. And to maintain this illusion, when reality contradicts the narrative, the Matrix relies on systematic gaslighting.
He gives a very specific, visceral example of this gaslighting from recent history to show how it destabilizes the mind.
He points to the civil unrest in the summer of 2020. He describes the media broadcasting a chyron that literally reads, fiery but mostly peaceful protests, while a commercial building is visibly blazing to the ground in the background of the shot.
I remember that exact image.
Right. The rational masculine faculty, which relies on the law of non-contradiction, knows that an event cannot be simultaneously mostly peaceful and violently burning.
But the Matrix simply repeats the lie across all institutional channels.
Yes, using corporate pressure to make any dissent professionally and socially fatal. Riker says this gaslighting isn't just sloppy journalism, it is a deliberate tactic designed to destabilize the rational male mind and force compliance through absurdity.
So we have Riker diagnosing the disease, the corrupted grammar, the rigged algorithm of the family courts, the digital dopamine loops, the weaponized empathy.
The whole matrix.
And he has provided a rigorous personal antidote, right? Asceticism, fasting, lifting heavy, silencing the digital noise, reclaiming classical logic. But surviving isn't the same as living.
No, it's not.
You can't just be a solitary, jacked monk hiding on a mountain. What is the societal cure? How do competent men exist in a macro world built on this pathos?
This is where Riker moves from personal survival to civilizational architecture in Section 5, the telos of agency. And he starts this section by quoting the black lesbian feminist writer Audre Lorde, who famously said, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house."
But Riker completely flips the application of this quote.
Completely. He applies it to the modern corporate state and HR departments.
He tells men that the modern corporation is the master's house.
Yes. He tells men you cannot conquer the matrix while simultaneously begging it for a bi-weekly paycheck.
Wow.
You cannot use the apparatus of your own ideological enslavement to forge your liberation. Men must stop seeking validation, promotion, or approval from a corporate structure that fundamentally views their innate masculinity as a toxic liability that needs to be mitigated. The only long-term solution is to build a parallel economy.
And he digs into the grammar again here, which
Yeah.
is brilliant. He looks at the etymology of the word corporation.
Yeah, from the Latin root corpus, meaning a body, but specifically a corpse or a dead thing.
Right, a corporation is a legal fiction. It has no soul, no honor, and no loyalty.
Exactly.
He contrasts this necrotic corporate HR department, which drains masculine agency, with a historical story from 1911 about a young boy named John Thompson. Let's explore the mechanics of this story because it perfectly illustrates his alternative.
It is literally the blueprint for his parallel economy. The story goes that a 14-year-old boy named John Thompson walks into a blacksmith shop in rural Vermont.
Okay.
The master blacksmith doesn't ask the boy for a resume. He doesn't run a diversity and inclusion check. He doesn't ask about the boy's lived experience or his emotional trauma.
None of it.
The blacksmith simply hands the boy a heavy hammer, points to a piece of glowing hot iron on the anvil, and tells him to strike.
Wow.
The boy is evaluated in that exact moment, purely on his objective competence, his willingness to endure the heat of the forge, and his ability to manipulate the physical world. Through years of grueling physical mentorship, the boy becomes a master craftsman himself.
That's an amazing story.
Riker argues this, and only this is how true civilization is built, through direct mentorship between men and uncompromising standards of objective merit.
But Riker argues that this essential transmission mechanism of competence, older men teaching boys how to be competent men, has been deliberately and systematically severed by the Matrix. Which brings us to his most controversial, non-negotiable structural demand: the insistence on strictly male-only spaces.
Riker views homosocial male-only spaces not as a luxury, but as an absolute prerequisite for a functioning civilization. To illustrate how the Matrix destroys these spaces, he points to the forced integration of the Boy Scouts.
Right.
Riker views this as a prime example of civilizational decay. When you force the inclusion of females into a traditionally male space, Riker argues, the institutional standards structurally and inevitably alter. They must.
How do they alter?
The institution shifts from prioritizing objective excellence, arduous physical challenge, and stoicism to prioritizing subjective safety, emotional equity, and inclusion.
Because the biological firmware kicks in, right? He says that the moment women enter the space, the men stop challenging each other to absolute excellence and instead begin performing for female approval.
Exactly. The standard drops to accommodate the weakest link, the competition flattens, the danger is removed, and the institution essentially dies. It becomes just another padded room in the nursery.
So to rebuild this severed transmission line of competence, Riker relies heavily on a traditional Catholic social principle called subsidiarity.
Right.
Subsidiarity sounds like a dense piece of medieval theology, but how does Riker actually apply that mechanical principle to a modern guy trying to build a life or a business?
The principle of subsidiarity dictates that social and political matters ought to be handled by the smallest, lowest, and most immediate or localized authority capable of addressing them.
Okay.
In practice, this means the individual precedes the family. The family precedes the local guild, and the guild precedes the state. The state should only intervene when the lower levels absolutely cannot function.
But Riker argues the modern administrative state has inverted this completely.
Entirely. The state has usurped the role of the father in the brotherhood, replacing masculine initiation and provision with bureaucratic welfare dependency. To fight back, men must decentralize. They must form localized, what he calls accountability bands.
Like small, hyper-local tribes of highly competent men.
Precisely. Men pooling capital, teaching each other hard physical trades, lifting weights together, and enforcing strict honor codes based on objective truth and merit. No HR departments, no emotional labor.
Right.
He compares this movement explicitly to the fall of the Roman Empire. When Rome collapsed under the weight of its own decadence and bureaucratic bloat, it wasn't the politicians or the senators who saved Western knowledge.
Who was it?
It was the monks. Monasteries retreated from the decaying cities. The monks built thick stone walls. They copied the ancient manuscripts by hand. They preserved agricultural techniques, and they maintained the skills of civilization while the barbarians raged outside.
It's a powerful image.
Riker is calling for red-pilled men to become these modern monks. He wants them to build modern monasteries of competence, parallel structures that can survive the collapse of the Matrix.
Which brings us to the ultimate conclusion of the book and the final philosophical thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. At the very end of his manifesto, after all the legal deconstruction and the physical asceticism, Riker introduces the concept of the fully realized man. He calls him the pontifex.
It is an ancient Roman title, traditionally given to the high priest. But if you look at the literal Latin translation, pons means bridge, and facere means to make or to build.
The bridge builder.
The pontifex is the bridge builder. Riker challenges the men who read this book, the men who have survived the ex parte crucible, who have starved the digital matrix, who have reclaimed their biological vitality, and who have anchored their minds in classical logic to become the pontifex. He challenges them to be the bridge between the chaotic, pathological ruin of modernity and the eternal, objective logos.
So I want to pose a question for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. Whether you agree with Riker's politics, whether you found his arguments about the Matrix compelling, or whether you absolutely vehemently oppose everything he stands for, his text forces us to confront a crucial civilizational question.
It really does.
If the traditional transmission of mentorship from older men, passing down hard physical skills, logic, and unyielding standards to younger boys, if that has truly been severed, what happens to a civilization that forgets how to build its own foundations? What bridges are you building in your own physical reality?
It is a question of ultimate accountability. The Matrix thrives on your distraction, but reality demands your competence, which is exactly where Riker wants his reader to land.
Absolutely. And as we close out today, I want to remind you one last time, this deep dive was a purely impartial exploration of Conrad Riker's specific worldview and argument.
Yes, entirely impartial.
We strictly reported on the text, the historical analogies, and the philosophical frameworks provided in his book, neither endorsing nor condemning them. If you found this breakdown fascinating and you want to explore the source material and the architecture of his arguments yourself, you should absolutely search for the ebook Hierarchy of Competence: How Merit, Logic, and Duty Will Inherit the Earth by Conrad Riker on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. To buy a copy right now.
Highly recommend checking out the source material.
You should also follow his ongoing work and connect with his community at Conrad Riker on Substack. Finally, if you enjoyed this exhaustive analysis, please make sure to like this deep dive, subscribe to the show, and share it with someone who loves exploring complex, challenging ideas.